Here at Traxion HQ, we have been inundated with incredible wheels and wheelbases from all sorts of different manufacturers. Now, normally, we've been receiving direct drive wheels, which are kind of top of the range. There have also been some manufacturers making budget versions of direct drive wheels, but even when you use the word budget when applying it to direct drive, it's not really budget. It's still very expensive for a hobby. Now, Thrustmaster, who have made this, the T128, have been going down a slightly different route. They have already announced that they will be releasing a direct drive wheel. You guys probably know more about it than me because when I'm recording this, tomorrow they're doing a video about it and I haven't seen it yet, obviously, but you guys may know a bit more. However, in the meantime, they've been focusing on entry-level wheels. I'm not talking about entry-level direct drive, I'm talking about entry-level full stop, especially when it comes to force feedback. Now, this T128 is coming in at a cheaper point than their previous T248, which launched about a year ago. It was set to take on the Logitech G923 and G920. This thing is cheaper once again. So I want to answer the question today, is it good value for money, and have they actually managed to appeal to who I think they're trying to appeal to, which is the kind of entry-level beginner sim racer who's looking to take this hobby up but doesn't really know where to start and doesn't want to put in a huge amount of money on something like direct drive straight away. So first of all, I think the best place to start is with the price itself. Actually, just before I launch into price, I do want to say a quick thank you to Thrustmaster for sending us this wheel and pedal set to review. And as usual, I'm going to point you towards our review policy, which is in the description below. Now, price, of course, is a very important element when it comes to this wheel, and this is going to set you back £169 British pounds and 99 pence. It's $199.99 if you're in America, and in Europe, it's 199 euros. So it's very, very cheap. The T248 was actually 299 British pounds, and if you were in America, it was 399, a much bigger difference there for some reason. Now, when you compare this to Logitech's offerings, generally speaking, you can pick up a G923 or a G920 between 250 and 300 from most retailers, but if you want to buy it directly from Logitech themselves, the G923 is going to cost you £379. So this is a lot cheaper than the Logitech. Now, you can get cheaper wheels from most retailers, but they're not going to have proper sophisticated force feedback systems, at least in most cases. So how does this actually stack up against the wheels that do have sophisticated force feedback systems? How is this sophisticated force feedback system? We're going to answer all of those questions very shortly. So what's actually included for that price? Now, first of all, you have, of course, the wheel, which is a rim and a wheelbase all attached, one big unit. You also, I say big, it's pretty small actually. You also have these magnetic paddles on the back, so you can use manual shifts. We have a table clamp, so you can clamp your wheel to a table or a desk or a cheap rig or whatever it is you might be using this T128 with. Very handy indeed, works absolutely fine like most Thrustmaster clamps do. You also get pedals, which is obviously an important part of any bundle, and I feel like a lot of the cost savings being done here. These are the T2 PMs. Now, the other ones had 3 pedals on the T248 wheel. This one just has a brake pedal with a spring in it and a throttle. They're not the nicest. It would be nice to have 3 pedals, but yeah, you can see where they're saving the money. This is obviously a budget option. You don't need a clutch. Many people don't even want a clutch, so I understand that. As well as this, in the box, you also get your normal bits and pieces, so your power connector, your USB connections, all that kind of stuff, a user manual, a warranty, and yeah, the kind of regular things you would expect. But the actual packaging itself is just this plain cardboard box. There's no fancy foam. It does the job. There's nothing really in there that's going to be fragile, so I'm not really going to complain about that. It's absolutely fine. So in terms of features and whatnot, it's all fairly standard and what you'd expect. You have the buttons on the wheel. There's actually 13 action buttons plus a classic D-pad here. You even have handbrake specific buttons, which are designed for the use of a handbrake. Now, obviously if you have a handbrake peripheral on a wheel, you're going to use that as a handbrake, but I actually think this is a really, really nice touch because quite often when I'm using a wheel, I try and find whatever the best buttons are in terms of my thumb position to set as a handbrake, especially when I'm playing rally games. So to have buttons specifically designed for that, I'm quite impressed. I think that's a nice touch by Thrustmaster. You also, of course, have these magnetic paddles on the back, like I mentioned earlier, but it's all fairly basic. You can see what's there. The rev lights as well, there's 4 different lights. Very simple, no screen like there is in the T248, so nothing complex. That's probably a good thing, maybe less things to break, and to be honest, I'm not really using the screen very often anyway. Performance-wise, it should be fairly similar to the T248, especially when it comes to feedback, because it uses the same hybrid drive system, which is actually just gear-driven with a belt to kind of combine that. It's sophisticated to a degree. It's going to be a lot better than your very cheap entry-level wheels that you can pick up in any shop. And to be honest, it's a fairly tried and tested system, so that's not a problem. It produces 20% more force according to Thrustmaster than their older offerings like the T150 and the TMX. And you also get 900 degrees of rotation. which is lovely. I don't know why I'm showing you this. 900 degrees is 900 degrees, but there we go. That allows you to drive any kind of car, whether it's a road car or a race car, and it will automatically adjust as you're racing to what the car you're driving should be. And that is a really nice touch as well. There's a few little bits of attention to detail that I am very impressed with Thrustmaster for. Now, while the force feedback system may be fairly sophisticated, I have to say the build quality and what I'm seeing in front of me is a bit more rudimentary. It's not the nicest. I actually don't mind the design of the wheel and the layout. To be honest, the button positioning is pretty nice. The buttons themselves, they feel cheap. Now, I don't mind losing a bit of expense when it comes to the buttons, because at the end of the day, as long as they function as buttons and are reliable, that's absolutely fine. They don't need to have that amazing Moza click to them to be good buttons. However, I would say the rim itself is a bit of a letdown. Now, this rim doesn't have any soft touch to it. There's no leather, it's just hard plastic all the way around. It's going to be slippy when you're using it. It doesn't feel nice to touch. It doesn't give it any sort of premium feeling. And I'm not saying that a budget wheel should feel premium, but it just makes it feel a little bit like a toy. I'm saying that quietly because it feels like quite an offensive thing to say. This thing, it does give you that vibe. Being completely plastic in its construction, it just feels a bit toyish. I will, however, commend them on the improvement to the shifters, because these shifters are a little bit less obnoxious than the T248. They're a little bit quieter, they're still not the nicest, but they do give you a nice feeling of actuation and they're not quite as loud. And I also want to commend them for the cable management, because underneath, and this is the same with the T248, they've got lovely cable management. That's actually quite helpful, especially with someone who's got lots of wires going everywhere. You want to keep your steering setup nice and tidy, especially if you're using it on a desk that you also use for your regular PC. I'm happy with that. I should probably also mention the construction of the pedals at this point. Now, these are cheap. These are not very nice. It's like I said earlier, I feel like this is where they've saved a lot of money. They just look and feel like a toy set of pedals. The brake spring doesn't feel that strong. I'm going to try them out very shortly, so I'll let you know how they feel underfoot. But to touch, if I saw these in a shop, I'm not impressed. I'm not looking at these and thinking, oh, I want to go racing on them. I'm thinking, I'm going to break them. So yeah, we'll see what they're actually like though in use, because that is what I'm going to do next. I'm going to try out this wheel, try out these pedals, and see if they do deliver something worth fighting for. So first of all, getting the wheel set up in the first place is very, very straightforward. We've actually just clamped it to one of our desks here, because I feel like most people who'll be using a T128 are probably just starting out in sim racing. They maybe don't have a fancy rig or anything like that, but the desk clamp works very well. It's very solid, I can't shake it about or anything like that. In terms of the actual software as well, to actually get the wheel connected to your PC, your Xbox will be a lot more simple, but on PC you will need to go in and download the drivers. It's a simple case of Googling Thrustmaster T128 drivers, going onto their official website and hitting the download link. Very, very simple, takes a few minutes to install, and then when you type in game controllers in your start menu, this appears. And you can see here, we've got Thrustmaster Advanced Mode Racer. Go into properties, and this is basically it. You've got all of your customization options in here. It's not quite as fancy or flashy as many of the other manufacturers with their own fancy software. This one is just very basic, but it does the job. You can see here you've got rotation angle, so between 900 and 140 degrees. You can see my pedal inputs as well as I press the throttle and the brake. You've even got test forces as well, so we can apparently simulate an explosion on the force feedback. So if I click this button here, it's not a very dramatic explosion, but I mean, the force feedback works, that's the main thing. You also have a gain settings tab. Now this can control obviously your overall strength of the force feedback, the constant, the periodic, the spring. I've not really played around with any of these things yet, but they're all set to 100. The overall strength by default is set to 75%, which gives you a little bit of wiggle room. If you want to make it a bit stronger or weaker, there's plenty to work with. So very, very simple. But the best part is it's just plug and play, a couple of minutes of effort and you're good to go. The one thing you do have to think about with this wheel when you're deciding what settings to run, these pedals, the spring and the brake is not going to be super strong, so I would recommend turning on ABS. You're probably going to have a better time. Obviously you can turn it off and get the realistic experience, but it's going to be tricky to avoid lockups, so that is one of the compromises of buying a cheap pedal set like this. You're going to have to deal with that. So I think for the sake of this, we'll have ABS on for now, just so I can get a proper feel for the wheel itself. So right from the off, you are getting a decent feeling through the wheel in terms of force feedback. Obviously this wheel rim's quite small as well, so that's something to get used to. I've been using lots of big rims recently, such as the, Moza for example. This thing's quite small, but actually I don't mind that. It feels nice and comfortable. And yet instantly you do get that weight from the force feedback, a little bit of notchiness when you're turning ever so slightly. You can almost feel the belt and the gears working away. It's just not as smooth as you would get with something more expensive, but that's obviously not what we're comparing it to. Straight away in a car on a game like Assetto Corsa in a car that's difficult to drive, it's not easy to keep under control. You're going to be getting sideways. You're going to be relying on the forces through the wheel. I'm getting pretty good feelings already. At high speed, we can turn it in, balance it, we get sideways, but the wheel's keeping up with me and my movements. I don't feel like it's lagging behind or struggling when I actually do get it sideways. We'll tackle corkscrew. Missing my clutch right now, I have to say. And once again, we can slide out of the corners, work the car hard, and yeah. The force feedback is being sensible force feedback. It's doing what I want it to do. It's instant. And it's only at 75%, bear in mind as well, so you can turn it up from here. So far, the biggest negatives that I've experienced are probably the wheel rim itself. So it's hard plastic, as you know, there's no leather, no grip to it. And already, as I'm beginning to get a bit warmer, my hands are getting a bit sweaty, it doesn't feel that great. It's not uncomfortable, but you just start losing grip. So you are going to want to be using gloves or have some sort of, rubber on there or grip to make it a little bit more enjoyable over a long stint, because you are actually going to be affected by it. If your hands are slippy, it's not going to help. It's not a very nice thing to say, but it's the truth, unfortunately. The other negative so far is probably the pedals. So obviously, these pedals, you're probably going to want to mount them against something, whether that's pushing them back against a wall or creating something that holds them in place. Obviously, it's not an issue if you're using a rig, but for me right now with the pedals on the carpet, they do slide back. You would expect them to, but there's no real effort to give proper grips underneath them to make them static, which is a bit of a shame. Now, I was also thinking it might be an issue, pushing the pedals back up against a wall because there's a wire at the back, but actually Thrustmaster have thought of that and they've created a little tunnel for you to put the wire so you don't get any damage. So that is a good thing from Thrustmaster. So the cable's actually coming out the side instead, but as I say, without anything holding these pedals in place, they are going to slide, so you really do need something just to stop them getting further and further away from you. Now, of course, the other thing about these pedals, specifically the brake pedal, is with that spring, it's not super strong. And that does mean, as I was saying before, that you're going to be better off using ABS. You are going to struggle if you try and do this with no assists on, with no ABS. You're going to have to really be careful with how you manage that brake pedal. And there's not really that much travel in it, and it's all done through, I think it's Hall sensors in the brake, so it's not potentiometer based, but still, it's not going to give you much flexibility. So you do have to be careful, and you have to be, precise with your braking movements. I have driven a little bit with ABS off, and it's doable, but it's tough. And if you're going to be competitive in like an esports event or something, obviously this is where you're going to be compromised the most using a wheel like this. It's a similar story with all kind of budget pedal sets really that aren't heavy load cells or anything like that. The button placement really is good though, on the actual wheel itself. Everything's within a thumb's distance. It's very easy to press these buttons. Oh, I've just changed my view by accident. Don't even know what the buttons are assigned to right now, but that handbrake button they were talking about as well being there, that is really, really handy for a thumb. I've not got a handbrake assigned in this Merc for obvious reasons, but very, very straightforward, right or left hand. And the shifters as well, they're in a really nice position. They don't feel that bad. They are clunky and a bit loud, but it doesn't really bother you unless you accidentally, push it harder than expected. It's really not going to cause you any issues. I actually like the feel of them, to be honest. The best thing about this wheel though, for me so far, is genuinely the force feedback. Like, it's a budget wheel, yes, but the force feedback feels sophisticated. It's like I mentioned at the start, even though there is that notchiness and that grinding noise almost when you turn it too far, it doesn't feel grainy. I'd say I actually get a better first impression with this than I did originally with the T248, but they obviously use the same system. So what I'm trying to say is it's not any worse than the more expensive T248. It's just as good, and I'm actually quite impressed, especially on a sim like Assetto Corsa where, force feedback, driving old classic cars like this, it really does matter. Now, if you're able to have a good time with this wheel on a more serious sim, you're probably going to be able to have a great time with it on a slightly less serious sim, whether it's Forza Horizon or the F1 game or something like that. It's going to be more than adequate. And I genuinely feel like if I was to use this wheel in an esports event or at least a private league race, I don't think it would compromise me too much. I think I'd be able to be competitive. It's just instantly given me positive feelings. I'm pleasantly surprised. Like, it's a budget level wheel. I obviously have to tailor my expectations to that and talk about value for money, not just outright performance and quality, but it's exceeded my expectations in terms of feel, for sure. And I like the size of it when I'm using it. It doesn't really bother me. It just looks a bit like a toy, as I've said before, but it doesn't really feel like that at all when you use it. It feels like a proper serious wheel. So yeah, I'm very happy. Actually, I do really quickly want to just put this thing through its paces. I'm gonna turn off the ABS and jump in an old Lotus 49 around Zandvoort because I want to test this thing to the extreme. If it can handle this, it can handle pretty much anything. With these pedals, you definitely want to be wearing socks, not shoes. With shoes on, you've got no hope. With socks, at least, there's a little bit. And this Lotus is always fun to drive. Oh! Okay, into the chicane. Let's see how these brakes are. We're gonna brake nice and early. Okay, it was manageable. You could hear me, like, obviously braking very early, barely touching the pedal, and then as I squeezed it on, I did manage to get it slowed down without activating a lockup of any kind, but yeah, you're basically going off guesswork and very light feel rather than any kind of muscle memory or anything like that. You can drive with it, but I feel like if you're doing something serious, you're gonna struggle. Yeah, you're not gonna be using a heel and toe technique with these pedals, that's for sure. Not that I can heel and toe properly anyway, but you definitely don't want to even try that. I do have to say though, I am still, even in this combination as well, just very, very impressed with the force feedback specifically. Like, and as I said before, it's maybe just my expectation levels, but yeah, this is still a really, really fun racing game experience. I have to say, I am surprised and very impressed with how this thing feels, especially in the force feedback department. There are, of course, those flaws that I talked about, but it genuinely does a good job. And at the end of the day, if you're in the market for a budget entry-level steering wheel, good force feedback is one of the most important things. Compatibility is important, and you want it to be easy to set up and easy to use, and it is. So I'm very impressed with that side of things. I have no complaints, and although it's not the perfect wheel, it's not the most lovely thing to touch, and you probably will want to use gloves or put grips on or something, it's a really, really good starting point, and I have to say, it surprised me, especially with the force feedback, it really did. At the end of the day, Thrustmaster are most likely aiming for that market of maybe young people who are interested in likes of Formula 1 or motorsport, but at a very base level, and they want to try and get themselves into playing racing games on a more serious level, maybe moving from a controller to a wheel, whether that's a hardcore sim or a casual sim. But no matter what you play with this wheel, it's going to give you something decent. It's going to be a big, big upgrade from a controller, and I think they've hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is the perfect Christmas present if you've got a kid, maybe 13, 14 years old, who wants to have a shot with a proper steering wheel. It's not a toy, even though it may look a little bit toyish at times. And to be honest, the likelihood is if they enjoy this, they're going to want to get something better in the future. But it does fill that gap in perfectly, where you can try it out, get used to a proper simulation feeling, and then you can upgrade in the future, as I said. So, well done, Thrustmaster. A question I have is, would I trade it for my G29 at home? I'm not sure I would. I think the force feedback specifically is probably better on this, in my opinion, based on the short amount of time I've had with it so far. But in other areas, I still prefer the Logitech, and I got the Logitech for less money than you'd buy this new. I did get the Logitech second hand though, but it's lasted pretty well, so it's a tricky one. But I have to say, I actually feel better about this wheel and its chances than I do about the T248. I think this is a better place to start for that kind of money, because if you buy a T248, you're spending a fair bit more for something that's not really that much better. A lot of the improvements that you get are superfluous or just not that important. So yeah, I think I could recommend you guys the T128, but I want to hear if you guys have got it yourselves, what you think of it, and do you agree with what I've said or do you disagree? Please do let me know down in the comments below. And of course, if you want to see more hardware reviews in the future, please do subscribe to the Traxion channel and hit the notification bell to catch those videos as they are released. Until I see you next time, thank you so much for watching, enjoy your racing, and I'll see you next time.